Good afternoon and welcome to our audience here at the University of Alberta, Augustana campus, and welcome to our audience on North Campus. We're streaming this online, and for all of the other contributors and those who are watching all across the world. This is a Festival of Teaching event, and the University of Alberta's annual Festival of Teaching is changing. We're becoming a year-round celebration of excellence and innovation in teaching. The Festival of Teaching theme this year is Teaching Moves. And that's to highlight the action of teaching and the various ways in which teaching practices and teachers continuously evolve, pushing traditional boundaries while always striving to motivate, inspire, and move students. So welcome. I'm Cherie Kwangsi, Interim Director of the Center for Teaching and Learning, and I'm here with my co-chair, Bonnie Sadler-Takash. Oh, I always do that to Bonnie. Bonnie's a wonderful person. We're here with some of our students, and we're really looking forward to hearing this panel discussion. I will turn it over now to Augustana Dean Alan Berger, who will introduce the panel members for today's discussion.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session on the Festival of Teaching. Our topic today is modes of engaging students inside and outside the classroom. And we have four presenters and discussants. They are, to my left, Dr. David Larson, Professor of Biology, Dr. Milton Schlossman, Professor of Music. To my right, Dr. Kim Misfeldt, Professor of German and recent 3M Award winner, and Dr. Paula Marantet, Professor of Psychology. Each of our panelists has prepared 5 or 10 minutes of remarks on the topic, and then after we've heard from all four, we will spend the remainder of the session engaged in conversation with one another. I will undoubtedly have questions for our panelists, but we also look forward to your questions from people who are in the room with us today, and also questions from those of you who are out in video land. So once again, welcome. We're going to get started with Dr. Dave Larson.
Thanks, Alan. I come to this session because of my experiences in outdoor learning environments. And it all started with me as a kid growing up on a farm, and the things that I love doing and what I learned most about biology and life and all the rest of it all happened outside and in outdoor experiences. So one of the things that I've done over time is try to find a way to express that in the courses that I've been teaching. I'm a biologist, so life should happen outside in one way or another, and that's one of the things that got me into my field, which was dealing with insects, and that guaranteed I was going to spend a lot of time outside. So I try and take my students there, one way or another. And over time, the whole topic of engagement, trying to get students to see what it is that's there. And the key thing, of course, as we all know, is to find ways by which students can love, relate to, and latch on to things around them that are exciting, and get their interest and hold it. As we all know, if somebody's emotions get engaged, positively or negatively, things happen in your relationship with them and what they learn, and that's the first step to make things really happen. So, for example, the first 8 years that I spent here on this campus, I teamed up with Gary Gibson, and you all know what kind of experience that is. It's outdoor wildlife and all kinds of things happening for taking people in community into the outdoors. Out of that 8 years, when we were totaling up, it turned out when I started adding days up, out of that 8 years, Gib and I spent 365 days with students off campus, working and living and developing community. Following that kind of experiences, a bio prof came up to me one day, one of my co-instructors, and asked whether or not I'd be willing to go with her to the tropics with students. And I said, I don't know anything about the tropics. And she said, most people don't. I said, well, I'll go anyway then. And we took off. That was in '99, and since that time we've had 90 students that we've taken into a biodiversity hotspot of the world down in Costa Rica. And that's been one of the outreaches that has been a big deal for me. The engaging students, all the buzzwords that you hear, you know, undergraduate research opportunities, place-based learning, ecological inquiry learning, the list goes on and on and on. And as Doris and I have looked back at our experiences, I think they all apply in one way or another to what we've been doing. We didn't realize it at the time. What we were trying to do is get students excited and interested and loving the things that she and I loved about the outdoor world. I ran across very early in my environmental kicking around an observation that meant a lot to me, and that is going into the outdoors without preparation, without understanding what's going on, is like going to an art gallery where all the pictures are turned to the wall. And the intent of an instructor is to somehow or other help students to turn the pictures around so they can see it and find a way to get involved with that. One of the other things that I've discovered about our students in the biology area is that they find it difficult to be or to let their peers know that they're bio geeks, or that they really, really want to play with living things and get involved, get their hands dirty and all the rest of it. And so if it's something that, you know, the classic one, you find some animal poo laying on the ground. If you're walking with a group of bio students, there's a big circle, and not only kneeling down and poking and digging, you know, they're not going the other way. And that's part of what the whole experience is all about. The point, though, is that ultimately, if the experience will let the student get engaged in a way that they personally have a strong reaction to it, it's empowering, and it's a way to be leapfrog off into pushing way beyond what they would normally do in many indoor classrooms. So for us, that means in the first semester spending a whole semester developing a research proposal of what they're going to do in the field when they get there. And that research proposal is detailed, it's based on literature, and it's based on that student becoming very, very familiar with a single type of organism or a group of animals or group of organisms. And the key point that we keep looking for is when the student, for the first time, will say something about my animals or my study. And of course, it's the "my" word that you're waiting for, because that means something is connected and has become ownership that we look for. Part of the other process, of course, is to build community. And with the trips to Costa Rica, we limit our student body group to 12 maximum. And that, of course, then allows for a roundtable conversation throughout the whole course time. All of our background readings and everything becomes it's a symposium. It's not a classroom setting. And by the time we get to Christmas and the research proposals in place, community has become a key component to why it works and why it happens. Individuals are helping each other do their study. They're working in teams in most cases, maybe 2, maybe up to 4, on their proposals and what they're going to do in the field. And then when they're in the field, everybody has a chance to work on each project, be part of, contributing member of each project. Ultimately, then, we get into a remote enough situation so that you're not disturbed by by television, you're not disturbed by most of the outside world. And that I think is a very, very key point to being able to make changes in people's attitudes and get engaged. You and I have a public front. All of us have public fronts, and you can present that and deal with it in a classroom setting much of the time until something disastrous happens and you're sitting outside the office waiting to see the prof and crying, as I heard this morning about a case that happened. Anyway, the thing is, once it becomes my study and people around you are helping you make it happen, and you're separated away from your normal support centers, getting out into an area that you're not familiar with, everything becomes very, very real. You're looking at everything around you. You're not skipping everything because it's all new, unique, and you're just automatically engaged in that process. Now, outdoor experiences, especially ones that involve being away from campus for a week, 3 weeks, whatever it happens to be, is a major test of both administrative and student commitment to be involved in that. We've been able to straddle midterm break, but have to pull a couple of days out of the academic schedule on both ends in order to get 10 days in the field at the research site. But those individuals then turn to each other, and you end up with a community type experience where you're sharing daily experiences, learning experiences, you're sharing daily oh my experiences, and today in the digital camera world, you're sharing what you saw. You don't come back and say, you should have seen what I saw today. It's right there. You've got the image. And what does it do to people? I've had a student who I never saw laugh in 2 years, who was running across the campus field where we were at the field station, laughing and giggling, running like crazy to try and get out to the site where they were going to go that day and get there first, because she might see something that she'd never seen before. And such things like, standing in the dark and you're hearing something crashing in the bush behind you, and you turn around and it's some little teenage peccary, that's a wild pig, has come stumbling through the bush, and they're both standing there and said, oh my God, what's this? Both the pig and the student. And you know, the eyes get big, the heart gets big, and they want to go and they want to stay and they want to come back. So that tied then to also doing real study. By that I mean these students are producing a study that is real research. And we emphasize that, and the students gain on that when they recognize that, number one, it's going to be a report that goes to the conservation group that we're working with, so it adds to their study, their background, and their understanding of their own site. The students also are aware that their papers are going to the student conference here on campus, but they've also gone to provincial, national, and international scientific meetings. Their papers, their poster papers have been accepted right up to international level. And so that means then the publication possibilities that go with it. That kind of thing has meant that these students say, I've got to get this right. And they come back and keep coming back and keep coming back to make sure that they go into the field with something that's going to be right and going to work. Anyway, student ownership and empathic response and a research opportunity is what's made it work for us.
Thank you very much, David. I'm sure there will be questions that will crop up in our discussion later. We'll hear from all of the presenters first and jump from the field station in Costa Rica to the piano studio. Milton.
Hi, my name is Milton Schlossman, and I'm a classical pianist. I also teach lecture courses, and along with, in terms of research, performing and doing CDs, I also have been doing research related to teaching over the last few years. And so today I wanted to just briefly chat with you about how my definition of classroom goes beyond the normal definition to include that of an artist studio. And in that respect, I have colleagues here on the Augustana campus, but also on the North Campus and the Campus Saint-Jean as well, who are teaching what within the U of A system is called applied music, which is typically one-on-one instruction. And especially around budget cutback time, all of us are used to explaining to our superiors and administrators what the value of one-on-one instruction is, particularly for, it begins in first year for students. And my sense is that I'm very privileged to do what I do because it really is like teaching graduate students, but it's at the undergraduate level. There's a level of responsibility that needs to be there in students, but also cultivated. And I've spent most of my career saying that it's the best learning environment. How could you not benefit from one-on-one instruction, a weekly chat with a professor? But what's interesting is that recently, in terms of research, there are people coming out and saying the opposite, that actually a one-on-one relationship actually can make a student learner lazy, that it actually can detract from learning in the sense that the student becomes totally reliant on a professor. That's not my particular view, but I think it points out that the important thing about a learning environment is that you guide people into learning so that they themselves, that they themselves become their own teachers, which is, I think, what most of us aim to be. So, you know, on this campus, there are at these universities, there's 3 campuses where students on a weekly basis are coming in for a lesson, could be up to an hour, And they're expected to go away and practice 18 to 30 hours a week. That's the norm, and that's the norm within North America, including for major music schools such as Juilliard and Eastman. What's interesting is that if you look at some of the models of learning, it is based on what I call a master-apprentice model. You basically go study with the great artist, and you're actually not supposed to ask too many questions. It's a little bit like going to see the Zen master on the top of the mountain, and you don't speak until you are spoken to, and a lot can be learned that way. But it creates an interesting dynamic in that often the information is coming from the instructor to the student, and the student becomes a bit of a passive vehicle within that interaction. Now, the expectation is that the student goes off and does all this work independently. But this model is one, I guess, that I am becoming less and less comfortable with, because I see how, unless you have an alive dialogue within that 1 hour that you have, which is very short. You know, for me, a student comes in, I ask how they are, that takes about 5 minutes. And sometimes it goes longer than that. And they have done 18 to 30 hours of practicing. 1 hour is so limited. Throughout the world, in some conservatory, students are getting 2 to 3 hours. And so what we do in our North American system is very truncated. And it means, as an instructor, you have to be very on task. But also, you are forced to deal with the fact that the learning that takes place in that hour is just one part of what that student will do in their week. They themselves have to be, in essence, their own instructors. So I have found throughout my career, which is now spanning about 27, 28 years, to be learning, I think, more ways to assist students during that period when I don't see them, so that they themselves are in charge of their learning. And I'm also learning how within that time I have with them to make it more of a dialogue. So some of the things that in terms of my research I've been looking at is the use of digital video cameras, so that in lessons students come in and after our little chat they play whatever they've been working on, and I will immediately record them at that point. And with the technology that I have, a DVD is burnt for them, and by the time they go out of their lesson, they have a hard copy that they will examine on their own to review how they performed in their lesson. And sometimes I'll also have them play, and we will work on their piece and then record them again, so that they actually even have a comparison, so that they can see how they first came in and played, but then also how it shifted. Through this sort of focusing on the use of digital video equipment, I've also been learning through neuroscience about the effects of how neurons are fired when you watch yourself on video performing a physical task. And so I have seen how my students are catching on to concepts more quickly through watching themselves perform a task, but also sometimes I will do that in their lesson. It'll be videotaped and they will go and examine me during the week, so to speak. And I'm not the first person to use digital video equipment, you know, in lessons, but there are few people who do it as regularly as I do. And I've sort of, at conferences, discovered this. Part of it is because technology is a little bit cumbersome still. It's not seamless. But also, in terms of innovation, it's interesting. Students do not like to see themselves on video. And my experience has also been, my female students in particular do not like to see their bodies on video. And you get into a whole interesting aspect of gender and cultural and societal construction about how they should look and how they really look. I'm a male. I also did not like seeing myself and do not like seeing my double chin on camera. But you get into very interesting issues. The Buddhists, in terms of meditation, describe meditation as a cosmic mirror. And so for me, the digital camera is that equivalent. You can't hide. And in fact, those of you with HD television know that Peter Mansbridge's wrinkles really come out on HD. So it's interesting because I'm using it as a tool to enhance their learning. They also on our campus are through a Tea Leaf award, I was able to place digital video cameras and computers in each of our practice rooms. So our students are also able to record themselves daily if they want. So moving beyond digital video cameras, one of the other things I've been sort of trying to be innovative with is that of what are called contemplative strategies. And so through, again, the University of Alberta, I attended a conference on how to incorporate contemplative or meditational strategies within the classroom. And so I saw how in classrooms of 100, if you are teaching students in an economics class about poverty, how to do a meditation on poverty. But I also saw how on a one-to-one basis this can be incorporated. Most of our students in performance suffer from degrees of anxiety, and that's one of the major issues that I and my colleagues confront. And so I have been using meditational strategies not only outside of the classroom, so to speak, such as before a recital to get students calm, but also even within the lesson. Coming into play for me or my colleague Kathleen, who's here, it's kind of intimidating. And so really I'm kind of giving a life workshop on how to get a job. It's, in other words, how you deal with stress, how you are focused in a stressful situation. And so that's an interesting innovation. And it has made me realize how in my performing career I have been dealing with anxiety throughout my career. And I think mental health, I know the University of Alberta has strategies for mental health right now. One of the great lies within music programs and performing arts programs is that our students are okay. And studies point to how I think 80% of professional musicians have suffered from anxiety in their careers. And so as a mental health initiative as well, meditational practices address, I think, not only the performance situation, but even the life of students on campus. Undergraduate education, I think, needs to be revamped. There's too much. Then something else drawing upon experiential learning theory that I've innovated with is an online log where students every day write about what they've practiced that day, what their goals were, if they met their goals. That's probably been one of the biggest innovations and one of the biggest ways that I've transformed my teaching and have seen how students have become more proactive in their learning. Again, it's not something that I didn't come up with the idea of journaling. My colleague Kathleen here in the area of voice was doing that way before I was. But this notion of an online log where I can log in and see what they're writing so that when they come to their very brief lesson, I actually have a sense of what's gone on. And some of the things I have to track and my colleagues track are physical pain, and that can be chronic. Also sort of emotional state of mind, as well as concepts of learning and how students are dealing with that. So that's something through research in terms of experiential learning theory that I've done. If I can just introduce to you one of the challenges I have there, it's that it's just the reading of these journals, which is a challenge. And the one thing that I learned from experiential learning theory is it's not good enough just to have your students write. The best learning is when they are being responded to, because we carry mythologies in our minds about our bodies, how we do. Most pianists, most performers, classical musicians in particular, are known for beating themselves up, even after a good performance. And so the research that I've done has pointed to how you need to basically intervene directly after students perform, because within 8 minutes, they have the mind of a clinically depressed individual. it's quite striking. So again, this goes to the whole notion of mental health and how our students are really going through massive transformations of intellect, but also emotions, and dealing with many things that I think instructors are sometimes unaware of. Just one last thing I want to mention is that I've also, within the last year, been trying to be innovative with a graduate program on our campus, which is the physiotherapy program, and talking about things, trying to get my students doing stuff outside the classroom. You already heard I hardly have any time to deal with my students, but I've had physio grad students here assessing my pianists. And this has meant everything from taking them over to the physio lab here and evaluating, taking literally videos of them, examining their posture, inquiring about physical pain that they have, to also setting them up with preventative stretching exercises that they are to do before they practice, but also during practicing. They also have even hooked me and my students up to check our carbon dioxide levels as we play, and it basically confirms something that I knew, which is that, talk about stress, 50% of my students at various points of playing aren't breathing because of the stress. And so in terms of innovation, I've now, instead of asking students great psychological questions such as, what went on when you skipped that page? I now say, were you breathing? Because talk about missing cues. And so that is something which has been exciting for me. This past fall, I also had a student do a directed reading between me and one of the physio profs here. And that was terribly exciting because I actually got to have a student learn anatomy from someone who knew something about anatomy. So I think that's one of the unique things that happens on this campus that doesn't happen elsewhere in my chats with people. My office is located right beside the physical education area, and these physio students are coming into our practice rooms, which is the opposite of the medical model or the health model in society, where injured people go into offices and the health practitioners never see what the people do to get injured. So I think that's kind of exciting, and is something obviously I can't do within the regular time I have. My students have told me that it's helping them, and it's giving them a larger view about health and wellness. So those are just some.
Thanks very much, Milton. We've covered a very broad and diverse terrain, and it's going to get broader and more diverse as we shift to Dr. Paula Marantet.
Hello, I teach in psychology, and I don't have the opportunity to take students outdoors in foreign countries, and I don't have the holistic approach that Milton is using with his performance students. And what I want to talk about today is my experience trying to increase engagement in the classroom. As a psychologist, I teach some of the larger classes at Augustana. Our biggest classroom holds 100, so I'll be talking about first and second year classes that have maybe 50 to 90 students in them, and my approach to try to increase engagement there. I do in my first year classes use an approach called TeamBased Learning, but most of the local people are pretty tired of hearing about that, and I'm actually going to focus on things that I've been doing in my second year course this year, which has just over 50 students in it, to try to increase their engagement without committing to this very engaged model of team-based learning. I am very interested in thinking about how students learn, and that's not particularly surprising because I am a cognitive psychologist by training. Cognitive psychologists spend their time thinking about thinking, and since I spend a lot of time teaching students, I naturally extend that to thinking about students' thinking, and to how students are not taught to reflect on their own thinking and learning experiences. Thinking about one's own thinking is a process called metacognition, and I believe encouraging metacognitive activity is one way to increase engagement in the classroom. At some point in my 20 years of teaching, I noticed that students were often surprised by their exam results, but particularly so when the results were lower than expected. Due to a psychological disposition called overconfidence, it is not unusual for students to receive grades that are lower than they expect. Human beings are exceptionally good at maintaining overconfidence, even in the face of evidence to the contrary. Last year, I had a first-year student who failed to turn the page on a quiz and received a grade of 10 out of 20. She missed 5 marks worth of points, and when she was discussing what she was going to do with this barely passing grade, she said, "Oh well, at least I got an A on the questions I did answer." So that would have been 10 out of 15, which works out to 66%, and I've never given an A for that in my life. So ignoring her quantitative literacy issues, I think that that kind of overconfidence, people, she was sure she did well on this, and oh, she had forgotten to turn the page, that was unfortunate, but she had surely done well on the rest of it, even in the face of clear evidence. Overconfidence is part of the reason why students think their paper, exam, midterm should have received a higher grade. It's also part of the reason why they think they understood everything when they walked into the exam. And I think we need to pay attention to that as teachers. But there's another issue at play, and this is the confirmation bias. And this is a bias that everyone has, all of us, to hear or seek out or accept information that fits with what you already think. The confirmation bias and the problem of overconfidence affect what students can learn in the classroom. The confirmation bias means that students hear what fits into their existing cognitive framework for the concept that you're discussing with them. If they read the text and develop some version of the concept, then when you lecture about it, they will slot into their conceptual map whatever fits from what you said, and they will change whatever you said to fit into their conceptual map. I'm fighting with a little concert that's happening downstairs in our forum, and I think the concert is winning. So they will change whatever you said to fit into what they already think is true. If they didn't read the text, which may occasionally happen with your students, they will listen to your lecture and hear what you say in light of, in general, what they think is true about the world. They're not really hearing what you say. They're hearing what they're willing to believe about what you say. And this is a profound effect on what students, the experience students are having in the classroom. So they'll take what they understood or what fits. They'll completely ignore what they didn't understand or what didn't fit and move on. On the whole, they ignore that part, and because they have overconfidence, when you ask, "Are there any questions?" "No." "Did you understand that?" "Yep." And there you are. So I'll give you an example of a notoriously challenging concept we teach in Intro Psych called negative reinforcement. This is not a difficult concept, but it is very difficult to teach to students. The idea of negative reinforcement is that removing something unpleasant about the environment will increase the frequency of the behavior that removed it. I'm not sure what that behavior would be right now, but I'll give you a more concrete example, the snooze button. When your alarm goes off in the morning and you hit the snooze button, it stops. The alarm is noxious, particularly if you're 18, sleep deprived, and you have to go to an 8 a.m. class. Hitting the snooze button gets rid of this noxious stimuli, and that increases the likelihood that you will hit the snooze button in the future. This is negative reinforcement. Students can repeat what I just said back to me, and that's good. But when I ask them to generalize to a new situation, they will equate negative reinforcement with punishment, which is not the same thing. I have found that telling students that negative reinforcement is a trap and that they need to pay special attention to it and not fall into the trap is largely ineffective. I spend a lot of time on this in first-year classes. I sing and dance, and I kind of mean that literally, and I reiterate how reinforcement and punishment are different. I showed an episode of The Big Bang Theory where Sheldon makes this very classic error. There is no want of attention, emphasis, examples, discussion about this concept in my intro psych class. But Students hear negative and they know that negative means bad. And that means punishment. And so they're humming the equations. They're enjoying or ignoring or annoyed by the song and dance. They're nodding their heads, and they're completely mystified by why I think this is so hard. So I just finished teaching this unit in Intro Psych. I went at this really seriously this year. I don't know if I brought it. Here is the reader's guide for this chapter in my class. Do you see this huge box that shows up in red when you print it in color on their screen on eClass that says negative reinforcement in like 24-point font? You might find this, my experience, this is a very difficult concept. Not because it is hard, because you think you understand it and you do not pay attention to the details. It's big, right? Like I hold it up in class. So here's the results from the exam. I asked the question about Sheldon on the exam. Okay, we did it in class. 24 out of 55 students got this question wrong. I asked a 1-mark question that gave them a new situation about negative reinforcement. 37 out of 55 students get it wrong. These are not special students. This is a bright class, actually. They're not lazy, but they cannot hear what I'm saying. So I haven't figured out how to crack the negative reinforcement one, but I'll tell you what I'm doing in some other classes. Students are overconfident, and they show this confirmation bias because they are human beings, and this is standard operating behavior for human beings. And on the whole, this strategy works for us. But university is different. We specialize in teaching complex and contradictory information. And this requires a willingness to listen, like Dave said about, they have to be able to see it. So I'll just use a different sense analogy. They have to be able to hear what you're saying. So how do we get them in a position where they can hear what's being said? And I think one solution is metacognitive awareness. I try never to ask in class anymore any questions. Good question requires work. It's very hard to ask a question about new information you've just received. If information was clearly and cogently presented, something I aspire to, but I will admit I don't always achieve in the classroom, but on occasions when I do, if I presented something in a clear and cogent manner, it made sense. They don't have a question, right? And due to overconfidence, they're pretty sure that they understood, right? So what I have started to do is this, to first give students reason to doubt their own understanding of this topic and to provide them with that opportunity before they're writing a test. This is metacognition. It gives them a chance to think about their own thinking. I do this by giving students problems to solve in class. Cognitive psychology is an experimental science. I often am presenting results from experiments. I'll often set up an experiment, and I've got the graph on the PowerPoint ready to go, and then I stop and I say, what happened? You tell me the results. So they have to make a prediction. They have to think about it. They have to engage. And I make them write it down and on a little slip of paper and hand it in, and I give them like a mark for having been there and handed it in. I don't have to care so much about what they wrote, because then I show the graph and it's like, wow, that is not what I thought was going to happen. And then they're confronted with the reality of their own misunderstanding. And that gives them an opportunity to actually then hear what I'm about to say. Yesterday I had a psycholinguistics unit, and students were learning about features that describe communication systems. One of those features was displacement, which is the ability to talk about places and times other than the here and now. I had talked about this in a previous class. I had the definition on the board in front of them. And I started class by handing out a little problem. Here's a bunch of communicative situations that humans engage in and other species engage in. Go through and determine which of them show displacement or not, and a variety of other features. And, oh yeah, no problem. It's like, yeah, she's doing that annoying thing again where, we're good, but she wants to make us do this over and over. Shortly, one of the groups called me over and said, we're having trouble with displacement. I get it, but what do you really mean? So listen to that. I get it. Don't worry, I'm good, I'm not stupid, but what do you really mean? And that's a quote. Great question, I said, and I wrote it on the board. And then I go around the class and the questions start to flow. Well, what do you really mean by this? What is a symbol? What do you said arbitrary, but like really? So the question, you don't even have to form articulate questions, but they're allowed to acknowledge, I can't apply this. This changes the environment. So they still deny that there's a comprehension issue. I get it, but they can acknowledge that they can't apply it. And because of that, they can ask questions. In response, I repeat the same information I gave in the lecture before. It's really, I say the same words, but now they can hear me because they have figured out that they didn't really have the right kind of conceptual system before. What I'm saying is not profound. We call this critical thinking. It's what we do at university. I think that professors do this all the time. But I have become much more intentional about how I do this in the classroom. And doing this in advance of giving students problems that are for meaningful grades. So this is kind of a low stakes, finding out, yeah, I'm not getting it. My goal is that this will increase metacognitive awareness and help students when they're outside of the class learn how to question their own understanding, which is, I think, what you have to do to become a critical thinker, because you have to do that to overcome confirmation bias and your own overconfidence. And being able to do that will enable them to be more engaged in their classes. And I think that knowing what you don't know may be the first key step in knowing how to learn.
Thank you very much, Paula. Our final presenter is Dr. Kim Misfeldt from German.
Okay, I'm going to talk about things that I do in class, but things that I also do that I think are adaptable to whatever class you're teaching. Some things are specific to language learning, but some things I think are quite open for all people to try. So I'm talking about fostering autonomous learners. And there's a number of factors in trying to imagine how we can encourage our students to take more responsibility for their own learning. And we've heard a number of comments about that already, and I'm going to shift it a little bit, but stay on the same path. I think that what is key for me in discussing learner autonomy is to say, okay, how much of the learning process do I control, and how much of that control am I willing to give over to the students? It's very important to me that students have a voice throughout the learning process. What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that concretely mean? I want to give you a couple examples of, and these are just concrete examples, but if you'd like more, I have more. But I want students to understand that when they speak in my classroom, that I value what they have to say about their learning process, and I value what they have to say about themselves as people. One example, I allow students to determine which assignments they do and the weighting of those assignments. So I even do this in first year classes, not the sizes that Paula is dealing with, of course, but I think it would be possible to do in larger size classes as well. But certainly in first year classes, I have 24 students, our maximum for language classes. So in 24 students, and they're in first year, so they don't have a lot of experience dealing with university courses, and particularly with language learning, which has to be a daily event. And so what I do for first year students is to give them a choice between assignments every 2 weeks. So they have assignments that are coming up, and within those 2 weeks they need to look at the assignments and decide, okay, I'm going to do this one, or I'm going to do this one. And giving them this choice, of course, forces them to engage with both assignments, because they can always just do the first one. That's the easy part, if they don't want to think about both assignments. But in most cases, they decide that they are going to look at both assignments to decide which one they more want to do. And it is surprising what choices they make sometimes, and it's not always choice A, so I do know they're thinking about it. And they also do much better when they make the choice about which assignment they're doing. And they do this on a regular basis, so it's just the the very simple thing of, okay, instead of creating one assignment that they have to do, there's two, and then they can decide which one they want. In second year, I can get more. I have other freedoms in first year as well, where they're deciding things. But in my second year courses, I allow the students to determine not only which assignments they're going to do, but I ask them to determine what types of assignments they would like to do as a class. Then they have to, and that's also whether or not they want exams and what kind of exams they want. What they have to do is then we go through, I ask them what they do in other classes, what kinds of assignments do they do in other classes. It doesn't have to be language classes, but any kind of classes. What do they like doing? What kind of assignments have they benefited from? I don't ask which assignments they hated. But I do ask what they've benefited from, which gets them again to think a little bit about how they're learning. So we talk about types of assignments, and then I ask them to, okay, imagine they have 100% to spend. How would they create then the evaluation for this class? And what they do is they work I give them a few minutes to plan their own by themselves. Then they work with a partner and compare their plan, and they have to convince each other. Okay, so the two people then have to agree on one plan. Then that pair works with another pair, and those students have to agree. And then eventually we get so that the whole group needs to agree on scales. And with larger classes, then I just have them write the various scales on the board, what their ideas are, and then people can vote on which marking scheme they would prefer the best. And this exercise encourages students to take ownership of the course and responsibility for their success. And they highlight in evaluations repeatedly how much they value that they have played an important role in course design. And also course objectives. So we can also talk about, what kinds of things they want to learn. And in different courses, I do that differently. One thing I did for the first time this semester is that when we came up with the various percentages, people couldn't agree on. Various models had 5% left over. So I said, okay, what we're going to do with this 5% is it's going to be a creative project. And you can decide whatever creative means to you, it's yours. This is a literature class. We're studying short stories. So you can do whatever you like. Come and talk to me about it, and we'll see where it goes. They also have a second presentation in this class, and the second presentation can be then, they negotiate then with me, depending on what they're doing for their creative project, whether the percentage for that presentation can go with their creative project or whether it goes with their term paper. So they can negotiate that with me. So I'll just give you an example. We're doing one of the creative projects, which I think is very timely in this point, and you wouldn't necessarily think about it coming up in a German literature class. So we were studying about a number of Second World War stories, of course. When you do German literature, that has to be there. And we were talking about university students and what their reaction were, or young people's reaction in the Second World War. And we talk about Sophie Scholl, who, if you haven't heard about her, she was executed by Hitler as a university student because she had, with her group of her brother and friends, made up leaflets to try and get people to wake up about what Hitler was doing. And they spread this around the university in Munich. And she was decapitated, she was executed by Hitler. So we were talking about this and saying, okay, looking at other people of that same age, what do you think, what makes the difference? Who do you identify with? Who would you like to identify with? Those kinds of things. So coming back to the creative project, then one of the students decided for her creative project to say, okay, if we have to stand up for something that we believe in, like Sophie Scholl did, what would they stand up for? And she's taken it upon herself for her creative project to be writing a letter to the Alberta government about the budget. A perfect example of bringing literature of over 60 years ago to 2013 and making it important in their lives. What does it matter to them? Why study German literature of 60 years ago? What does it matter to them? And to me, it's the perfect example of this is when they're allowed to do whatever they want, connected to the material. They come up with wonderful things. So also key to autonomous learning is the setting of learning goals and reflection on the progress towards those goals. And Milton talked about that as well. We do, like his online journal, we do a language learning journal. In the language learning journal, we talk about, okay, describe a communicative or a cultural experience. And we ask students to say, okay, what were you aiming for? What do you wish you had known in order to make this situation happen in a better way? And I think that's the key question. What do you wish you had known? Because then it encouraged them to say, okay, what's your learning goal for the next stage then? What vocabulary or what information do I wish I had had in order to make that work? And then they have a reason to learn that stuff, whatever it is. So that's very exciting to watch and to see how they take more ownership of what they're learning through the process of describing, but not just describing what I did, but saying, okay, what would have made this better? What really worked? Because they get really excited about talking about what really worked as well. As excited as sometimes the incredible things that come up when you say things wrong. And I want to go back to the metacognitive level that Paula was talking about. I do things, I've always worked on the metacognitive level with students because in language learning, we do a lot of things that people would say are silly. We sing songs, we dance, we do yoga sometimes, we play games. And lots of people can say, oh, you know, she just plays with her students. Well, no wonder she gets good evaluations. But what's interesting, being a department chair as well, is that I read student evaluations. And I can tell the people who explain to the students why they're doing these types of assignments and talk about what is the benefit. Okay, so we stop in the middle of a song perhaps sometimes and say, okay, why are we doing this? Of what benefit could it be for you? And then we always reflect then on whether or not it's effective. Okay, so then going back to the teaching evaluations, the student evaluations, you see the students where the professors don't explain why they're doing certain things, the students will say, oh, we wasted a lot of time, whatever. And in various courses, it could be, we wasted time watching videos, or we wasted time singing, or we wasted time doing X, Y, or Z. And particularly now, because students are paying so much for their education, they care about wasting time. And if you, however, you explain to the students why they're doing the things they're doing, they write that in the evaluations too, because they say, I really liked singing songs because it improved my fluency, because my pronunciation got better, because I could speak faster, and they have the reasons in the student evaluation. And I think that is where you stop and say, oh yeah, right, they are getting the reasons, that we're not just making them do silly things for fun. Fun is important too, though. But so they reflect on the effectiveness of the various activities or various methods in class, but also in their language learning journals as well. A couple of last things that I would like to mention, and then I'll leave it for questions. I think what is also key is that I always acknowledge that students bring knowledge and experience that's valuable to the learning process, right? They have taken other classes, they are taking other classes. So they do have knowledge that says, oh yeah, okay, I can learn best when I do X. Okay, it really challenges me when I do Y. So it's important to talk to them about those kinds of things. One last example, in my peer review process, which my students are doing right at the moment actually, because when I agreed to do this, I forgot that we had changed time of my class, so my class students are still doing this right now, hopefully, but they're going through a peer review process, and so they're writing papers, And they write multiple short papers rather than one long one. And I give them a rubric which allows them to read through the other papers in class. They don't know whose paper they're reading. And they are encouraged to comment on the paper, but also assign a grade. And this assigning of the grade according to criteria, not just assigning a grade for fun, but assigning a grade for criteria encourages deeper engagement with the criteria of the various grades. And it's helpful to the peer, of course, because they get the comments and they can revise their essays before they give them to me. But more importantly, it is beneficial to the individual student because they have engaged with the criteria themselves for their own paper, for their own assignment. So I guess a lot of what I do is about giving students a chance to have more power in the faculty member-student relationship. And so I guess my challenge to everyone is to say, okay, where can I give up some of my power and pass it to the students? Because that's really, I think, when they become engaged and autonomous learners. Thank you.